se puede,
sí se puede,
sí se puede,
sí se puede.
El pueblo unido
Jamás será vencido,
el pueblo unido.
jamás será vencido.
It's good to be home. Now we need to end the illegal abduction of Kilmar Abrego Garcia and bring him home too. We're joined by his wife, Jennifer, by his mother, Cecilia, by his brother, Cesar, and thank all of the rest of you who are joining us in solidarity with the Constitution and Kilmar. Look, I'm a little sleep deprived, and I want to be as clear as possible about what this is about and what it's not about. So I'm going to read the remarks that I wrote on the plane ride home. As the federal courts have said, we need to bring Mr. Abrego Garcia home to protect his constitutional rights to due process. And it's also important that people understand this case is not just about one man. It's about protecting the constitutional rights of everybody who resides in the United States of America. If you deny the constitutional rights of one man, you threaten the constitutional rights and due process for everyone else in America. The Fourth Circuit put it very clearly in its strong opinion yesterday, and I quote, "It is difficult in some cases to get to the very heart of the matter, but in this case, it is not hard at all. The government, in this case the Trump administration, is asserting a right to stash away residents of this country in foreign prisons without the semblance of due process that is the foundation of our constitutional order. Further, it claims, in essence, that because it has rid itself of custody, that there is nothing that can be done. This should be shocking not only to judges, but to the intuitive sense of liberty that Americans far removed from the courthouses still hold dear." They summed up the issue at stake perfectly. And that's why the Supreme Court, in a 9-0 decision, ordered the Trump administration to facilitate the return of Mr. Abrego Garcia. Now, the Trump administration wants to flat out lie about what this case is about. They want to change the subject. They want to make it about something else. And they are flouting the orders from the Federal District Court, the Fourth Circuit Court, and the Supreme Court to facilitate his return. That's why I traveled to El Salvador, leaving here on Wednesday. And I want to express my gratitude to members of my family and members of my staff who agree that we all must be prepared to take risks because of the current risk to our Constitution itself. In addition to having a variety of discussions on bilateral issues between the United States and El Salvador, I had two main goals. One was to urge the government of El Salvador not to be complicit in the illegal abduction and detention of Mr. Abrego Garcia and to release him. I made that request directly to the Vice President of El Salvador. The President was out of country at the time, and I've previously reported on that conversation. My principal mission was to meet with Kilmar Abrego Garcia. I told his wife Jennifer and his family that I would do everything in my power to make that happen. And last night, at about 6:40 p.m. El Salvador time, 8:45 p.m. here on the East Coast, I called Jennifer to tell her that I had met with Kilmar. And I told her what he said to me, which was first and foremost that he missed her and his family. And as he said that, you could see it here. Go down. Now, getting a meeting with Kilmar was not easy. On Wednesday, I met with the Vice President of El Salvador and asked if I could meet with him. The answer was no. I asked if I returned the following week whether I could meet with him. The answer was no. I asked if I could call him on the phone. The answer was no. I asked if his wife Jennifer could call him on the phone. The answer was no. No to his wife, no to his mother, no to his lawyers. So the following day, which was yesterday, I decided to give it another try by driving to Sikot. Sikot is the notorious prison where Kilmar was taken when he was abducted. I was accompanied by a lawyer for Kilmar's wife Jennifer and mother Cecilia, Chris Newsom. About 3 kilometers outside of Sikot, we were pulled over by soldiers. You could see the rest of the traffic was allowed to go by. We were pulled over by soldiers and told that we were not allowed to proceed any farther. When I asked why, I was told that they had orders not to allow us to go any further. When I asked them if they knew anything about the condition of Mr. Abrego Garcia, they said no. And so much later in the afternoon, I was actually getting ready to catch a plane out of San Salvador back here later yesterday evening. And all of a sudden, I got word that I would be allowed to meet with Kilmar Abrego Garcia. And they brought him to the hotel where I was staying. And after that meeting, as I said, I called his wife, Jennifer, to report on some of the news of that meeting. And now I'm going to report to all of you about our discussion. When I told him that his wife and family sent their love and were fighting for Kilmar to return home every day, he said that he was worried about all of you. That was his response. How are you dealing with this horrible ordeal and nightmare for the family? He said that thinking of you, members of his family, is what gave him the strength to persevere, to keep going day to day, even under these awful circumstances. He spoke several times about your 5-year-old son who has autism. 5-year-old son who was in the car in Maryland when Kilmar was pulled over by U.S. government agents and handcuffed. His 5-year-old son was in the car at that time. He told me that he was taken to Baltimore first. I assume that was the Baltimore Detention Center. He asked to make a phone call from there to let people know what had happened to him. But he was denied that opportunity. He said he was later taken with some others from Baltimore to a detention center in Texas. And some point thereafter, I don't know whether it was a period of hours or days, he was handcuffed, shackled, and put on a plane along with some others where they couldn't see out of the windows. There was no way to see where they were going in the plane. They didn't know for sure where they were going. They landed in El Salvador, and he was taken to Sikot prison. He was placed in a cell with, if I recall correctly, and don't hold me to it, of about 25 other prisoners at Sikot. He said he was not afraid of the other prisoners in his immediate cell, but that he was traumatized by being at Sikot and fearful of many of the prisoners in other cell blocks who called out to him and taunted him in various ways. He told me, and this was yesterday, that 8 days ago, so I guess 9 days ago from today, he was moved to another detention center in Santa Ana, where the conditions are better. But he said despite the better conditions, he still has no access to any news from the outside world and no ability to communicate with anybody in the outside world. His conversation with me was the first communication he'd had with anybody outside a prison since he was abducted. He said he felt very sad about being in a prison because he had not committed any crimes. When I asked him what was the one thing he would ask for in addition to his freedom, he said he wanted to talk to his wife, Jennifer. I told him I would work very hard to make that happen. I told him that in addition to his family, that all of you who are here today were fighting to bring him home. I told him that his brothers and sisters in his union, the sheet metal workers union, were fighting to bring him home. That brought a smile to his face. I told him that millions of Americans understand that what is happening to him is a threat to their own constitutional rights. I told him about the decisions of the federal courts, the district court, the Fourth Circuit Court, the Supreme Court. And I think that in addition to knowing that his family was fighting for him, all of that gave him strength, the fact that all of you here were fighting for him. I want to say something about the Trump administration's efforts to change the conversation about what this case is about. This case is about upholding constitutional rights for Abrego Garcia and for every American. The President Trump and the Trump administration wants to say that those who are fighting to stand up for our Constitution don't want to fight gang violence. That is an outright lie. That is a big, big lie. I, for one, have been fighting against transnational gang violence, especially MS-13, for over 20 years, probably for longer than Donald Trump ever uttered those words, MS-13. Over 20 years ago, I worked to establish an anti-gang task force, a regional anti-gang task force in the Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Virginia area. I did it in a bipartisan way with then Congressman Frank Wolf and Tom Davis. And we have made substantial progress in this region. We have a long way still to go, but those efforts have resulted in progress. So I say to the President and the Trump administration, if you want to make claims about Mr. Abrego Garcia and MS-13, you should present them in the court, not over social media, not at press conferences where you just rattle stuff off. Because here is what the federal district court judge said about exactly this issue. This is Judge Zinnes. So she is the federal district court judge in the District of Maryland, where the case first appeared. This is a quote from her opinion. Defendants, and in this case, this is the Trump administration she's referring to, have offered no evidence linking Abrego Garcia to MS-13 or any terrorist activity. And vague allegations of gang association alone do not supersede the express protections offered under the INA, unquote. She emphasized this point, and I'm quoting, "No evidence before the court connects Abrego Garcia to MS-13 or any other criminal organization," unquote. In other words, put up in court or shut up. What the Trump administration did admit in court was that Kilmar Abrego Garcia has been mistakenly detained. They called it a, quote, administrative error, unquote. An administrative error that has resulted in him being abducted off the streets of Maryland and put into prison in El Salvador, that has deprived him of his personal freedom and liberty. But rather than fix this grievous error that they agreed had been made in court, what did the Trump administration do? They upbraided and fired the lawyer who told the truth to the court. That's what they did. They didn't fix the error. They fired the lawyer who told the truth about this awful, egregious mistake. And now, despite the fact that the Supreme Court has ordered the Trump administration to fix that error, that has deprived Mr. Abrego Garcia of his liberty, they are flaunting, the administration, the Trump are flaunting the court order to facilitate its return. And the government of El Salvador is complicit in that illegal scheme. So we need to hold both of them accountable, and we can talk more about how to do that. But as I said at the beginning, this case is not only about one man, as important as that is. It is about protecting fundamental freedoms and the fundamental principle in the Constitution for due process that protects everybody who resides in America. This should not be an issue for Republicans or Democrats. This is an issue for every American who cares about our Constitution, who cares about personal liberty, who cares about due process, and who cares about what makes America so different, which is adherence to all of those things. This is an American issue. Now I just want to take a moment. I hadn't planned to do this, but as I was landing on the airplane, I got a transcript of some questions President Trump was asked at the White House today about what I would call Margarita Gate. I don't know if you guys have been following this, but President Bukele, after I met with Kilmar, did this tweet showing us at a table with these two glasses. So here's what happened. When I first sat down with Kilmar, we just had glasses of water on the table. I think maybe some coffee. And as we were talking, one of the government people came over and deposited two other glasses on the table with ice, and I don't know if it was salt or sugar around the top, but they look like margaritas. And if you look at the one they put in front of Kilmar, it actually had a little less liquid than the one in front of me, to try to make it look, I assume, like he drank out of it. Let me just be very clear. Neither of us touched the drinks that were in front of us. And if you want to play a little Sherlock Holmes, I'll tell you how you can know that. So if you look at the video or the picture I sent out from the beginning of our meeting, you'll see there are no glasses on the table. So you'll see in later videos they are on the table. But they made a little mistake, or some people are very careful, right? If you sip out of one of those glasses, some of whatever it was, salt or sugar, would disappear. You would see a gap. There's no gap. Nobody drank any margaritas or sugar water or whatever it is. But this is a lesson into the lengths that President Bukele will do to deceive people about what's going on. And it also shows the lengths that the Trump administration and the president will go to, because when he was asked about a reporter about this, he just went along for the ride. So the White House and the president have been lying about this case from the beginning. They've been trying to change the subject from the beginning. As I said, and the courts have said, from the Supreme Court to the Fourth Circuit to the District Court, what this is about is adhering to the Constitution, to the right of due process. And that's why we say, bring Kilmar home, so he can be afforded his rights under the Constitution. That's just what this is about.
Kilmar, have any idea the firestorm his deportation has caused here in America?
So I told him. That was the first he'd heard.
You can address the camera.
Sure. The first he heard is that after I told him that his family was fighting for him, I told him everybody else that was fighting for him, including his union members, but also people from across Maryland, in fact, across the country, who recognize that depriving Kilmar of his constitutional rights is a threat to everybody who resides in America. He had not heard that. I believe that gave him additional strength.
Senator, what did Abrego Garcia say that the officials in El Salvador told him about why he was sent to that prison and how long he would be there?
They haven't told him anything about why he was sent.
Or how long he would be there?
They didn't tell him anything about that.
And
In fact, I asked the vice president exactly that question. You know, why is he here? Is he violating any laws in El Salvador? Do you have any proof that he's committed a crime? No. Why are you here? Why is he here? Because the Trump administration is paying us to keep him here.
did he say what he heard from other migrants that were also there, that were also deported to that prison?
Did what? I'm sorry.
Did he say what he had heard from others who were also deported to that prison?
He did not know about what was happening in the outside world. And let me just say, at CCOT, I want to be really clear. At CCOT, they don't let any of the prisoners have access to the outside world. That's one of the conditions, one of the notorious parts of that prison, which, by the way, is a blatant violation of international law, as I said when I was
You're the first person that can see a person that was in Secot and that left Secot even for a few minutes. What did he say about how it is being there? Because he's the first prisoner from Secot that was outside, ever.
Oh, as I think I said, I mean, he said what he said was that it was his best guess that most of the cells were packed with about 100 people. I asked him why. He said when they take a roll call during the day, people have to call out their names from different cells. As I said, in his cell, I believe there were about 25 people until he was moved. But as I said, while he wasn't fearful of the other prisoners in his own cell, he was fearful about the taunts that he received from other prisoners in CCOT. Go here and then here, sorry. Okay, go
What do
ahead.
you think you've achieved with this threat, and what's next in terms of getting him actually released and sent back to the United States?
Well, the first thing was to accomplish what his mother and family were really desperate to learn, which is that he's alive. I hadn't heard a thing about him. That for someone who's, he's obviously in a terrible situation. As I said, he's experienced trauma. He said he's sad every day. But I think this persistence resulted in having this chance to meet with him, to begin to get a little bit of his story. And I think it is the first step to ultimately bringing him home as the Constitution requires. Go here. I'll go.
Did you have a sense of his health, his well-being? Did you get any indication that he'd been abused?
I did not get that sense. Look, you never know, but I asked him if he was okay. He said yes. He said he has a blood pressure condition. He has seen a doctor. So, on a very cursory examination, he appeared okay. Now, I will say, just to be clear, there was some negotiation about the terms of this meeting, and we were kind of surrounded by video cameras. So I do want to say that was the setting he was in. I should also just say, I mentioned the fake margarita scandal. They actually wanted to have the meeting by the side of the pool, right, in the hotel. Just right. I mean, this is a guy who's been in CCOT. This is a guy who's been detained. They want to create this appearance that life was just lovely for Kilmar, which of course is a big fat lie.
Senator, have
Have you been having any conversations over the course of the last 48 hours? I know you've been busy in El Salvador with Trump administration officials. Was there any indication, maybe with the administration, that they were more flexible than what they were saying publicly?
I have not. I did have a meeting with folks at the American Embassy there. And I really want to applaud them and every member of the Foreign Service and State Department in El Salvador and everywhere around the world. I co-chair the Foreign Service Caucus, and I have a deep appreciation for what they do. I asked them if they had received any instruction from Washington to help facilitate the release of Kilmar. The answer was no. I asked them if they had made any attempt to reach out to him. The answer was no. So it's very clear that the President and the Trump administration are blatantly, flagrantly disagreeing with, defying the order from the Supreme Court.
Can you talk about who from the Salvadorian government contacted you to facilitate this meeting? You mentioned that there were terms associated with the meeting. Were you told not to reveal any details from the meeting until you came back to the United States? And were you at all concerned for your safety in and around this meeting taking place, or at any point during your time in El Salvador?
So I was not concerned about my safety at this meeting. And I will say, you know, obviously there's a lot of uncertainty when you're approached by soldiers and have your car pulled over to the side of the road and told you can't go any further. But I will say that the soldiers acted professionally, okay, in their encounter with me. They had their orders. They implemented their orders. In terms of, I'm sorry, what was
about the meeting? How the meeting came to be? Who contacted you?
So the meeting, they reached out to say they would meet the Salvadorian government. Look, in El Salvador, everything happens because Bukele says it could happen. And if you look at the video he sent out right afterwards with the fake margaritas, you can see that all of that was a setup. Okay, so that's why. And as to how I was notified, their message was transmitted to me through the embassy.
Senator, in your meeting with the Vice President, were you able to glean anything about the agreement that the
Right here, and then I'll go right there.
Okay. The response from Republicans to your visit is that you care more to meet with Abrego Garcia than you do with Rachel Warren, who is the mother of a Maryland woman who died in your state. What is your response to that criticism specifically?
Well, my response is that my heart goes out to the family of Rachel Warren. As I said at the time, my heart breaks for what happened to them. That should not happen to any family in America. And I am very glad that a court of law convicted her killer and is going to punish her killer in a court of law. The reason we have courts of law are to punish the guilty, but also to make sure that those who have not committed crimes are not found guilty and arbitrarily detained. In other words, everybody has due process. So the effort by the Trump administration to try to conflate these two issues goes to the heart of what I was just talking about, their effort to change the subject. But again, to the Warren family, you know, we have 3 children. I cannot imagine losing a child and the heartbreak that caused, and it should not happen. And my heart breaks for everybody in Maryland or America who has lost a loved one to violence, regardless of the perpetrator.
Senator, in your meeting with the Vice President, were you able to glean any information about the United States agreement with El Salvador related to the detention facility, the terms, how much we pay, if the government has any say whatsoever what happens inside or directly?
So I didn't learn that directly from the Vice President, but I have learned about the commitments that have been made. So the Trump administration has promised to pay El Salvador $15 million to detain these prisoners, including the illegally abducted Kilmar. My best information, and it's pretty good, indicates that to date they've paid out more than $4 million of that $15 million. As to the terms of an agreement, I've not seen an agreement. I don't know whether there is an agreement that specifically spells out the terms and conditions here. I am aware that there was some document that memorialized the payments, but again, I do not know in any way if it goes through the details.
Senator, what's the next step here in light of the defiance, or perceived defiance from the Trump administration? What does Congress do?
So, you know, everybody asks those of us who are Democratic senators whether there's any bottom line where Republican senators will say enough's enough and won't simply continue to be rubber stamps for the Trump administration. So far, we haven't hit bottom. In this case, we have what I believe is an outright defiance of the Supreme Court. People still may want to hang their hat on the fact that it hasn't been completely adjudicated. As you know, the federal district court judge has ordered depositions of the administration officials. The Trump administration appealed it. That's what the Fourth Circuit decision was all about. That may well go to the Supreme Court. I don't know if the Trump administration is appealing that. So the question is there any point when the president is violating the Constitution of the United States that Republicans will stand up for the Constitution rather than just continue to do the bidding of the Trump administration?
Democrats are powerless.
When it comes to Congress. But let me say something on that. Not totally powerless. Because appropriations need to go through the Congress. And that $15 million, you can be sure we're going to be looking for where it is. Because that wasn't authorized in previous appropriations. We're operating under a continuing resolution. Now, they may try to pretend they can transfer that, but there's some indication that they were planning anyway until now to make that as part of the request. And you can be sure that I won't support the use of 1 penny of taxpayer dollars to keep Abrego Garcia illegally detained in El Salvador. And so as part of that process, yes, Democrats, at least in the Senate, have some sway. Now, I want to say something about the government of El Salvador. They are making a huge mistake. You know, they want to brand themselves as a country for technology. You know, the president said, you know, Bitcoin is legal tender. But now what they're branding themselves as the place for these huge prisons where people who are illegally abducted are warehoused. That is not a good look. There are also other things Americans can do with respect to economic pressure on El Salvador. People can stop traveling there. Actually, tourism's been going up. They can stop traveling there. There may be states that decide, you know, they don't want any of their pension funds invested in companies that invest in a place like El Salvador. So there are many things that can be done, and I just urge the president of El Salvador, the vice president of El Salvador, to rethink whether they want to become the place that just gets paid off for being complicit in this illegal scheme.
Senator, what's your colleagues? Your party leadership or your colleagues who plan to go down?
Okay, we'll do. We're going to do two more. We'll do two more right here.
Why did the Salvadoran government reverse itself on allowing you to meet with Mr. Abrego Garcia after telling you no? And also, do you have a sense of why the government transferred Mr. Abrego Garcia from CCOT to this other prison in Guantanamo?
Yeah. Well, I think the reason they relented is pretty clear. They were feeling the pressure. I mean, they were feeling the pressure because while I was in El Salvador, we had 2 major press conferences that included the local press who reported on this. And I think that they decided that it was not a good look to continue to detain Abrego Garcia without anybody having access to him. There's no other explanation for the fact that they said no, and then prevented us from going to the prison. So that's why. I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question?
The second part, why and what why did they transfer him from CCOT to the other prison?
Oh, well, I mean, number one, I will say, my main request was to meet with him. And as I said, he's no longer at CCOT. So he's at a different prison, which is pretty far outside of San Salvador. But in addition to that, I didn't even know that. I mean, so as we all thought he was at CCOT. I mean, until I met with him. That's why I tried to go to CCOT. So I think that's why they brought him. He wasn't brought him to see me.
Senator, what actions do you advocate your party take to prevent future deportations like this?
Do you think that the White House was involved at all in facilitating this meeting?
I do not. I do not.
Do you think
I have no basis for that.
Have you spoken to any of your colleagues who say that they plan to go down now that the president has seemed to shut the door? He lets you meet with them, but instead he's going back to detention and will not return. Have you spoken to them, and what do they hope to accomplish going forward?
So I've told the Vice President of El Salvador that I may be the first senator member of Congress to be in El Salvador, to come down to El Salvador, but I won't be the last. There are others coming. I've got to give them a call after this meeting to brief them on my trip. But this goes back to the fact that, you know, El Salvador is making a big mistake. President El Salvador is making a big mistake in being complicit in this illegal scheme.
How long did you meet for? How long did you
We met for over half an hour. There was no.
Senator, what else can your Democratic colleagues do to prevent future illegal deportations like this?
You mentioned the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights.
Yes.
Do you think that, and El Salvador is a party to that, do you think that your mentioning of that is part of what facilitated?
I think it could have been a factor because they are in blatant violation of that requirement, that international law requirement. Not only in this case, but actually in all of these cases, because I said the policy at that prison, CCOT, is to have no communication, not with your lawyer, not with your family, with nobody. That is a violation of international law. And as I mentioned, El Salvador is a signatory to that. Thank you all very much for being here. And
I was born in South Africa. Yes. And I was raised in December, and we were get some rest. Not about you.
Thank you.
No, no, I'm listening.
Oh,